I want to deal with the economics of immigration in a particular way. Opponents of immigration have argued that immigrants draw on the public services without making a contribution to pay for them. In other words, they are beneficiaries of public services of all kinds, but do not help to pay for them, and therefore are a burden on the rest of the population. It's a parallel argument you'll often hear to the notion that immigrants displace native citizens from jobs and are therefore a burden in terms of job availability for folks who are not immigrants. I want to focus on the first of those two. I want to talk about immigrants drawing on public services versus contributing to pay for them. I do that not as an advocate for or against immigration. That's not my issue here. But if we're going to have a conversation about immigration and the economics of it, which these two big arguments against immigration are economic arguments, well, then it is necessary, just in the interest of simple fairness and truth, to talk about both sides of the ledger. How do immigrants, in fact, help pay for public services? Which I will show you now, they do, and quite generously. So let's begin. The most important tax for most people is not what you might think. It's not the income tax, the money held out of your weekly check. There are immigrants who have that withheld just like everybody else and pay that tax. There are undocumented immigrants who work under the table, who don't have that money withheld, and often it means that they're not even paid what they're supposed to because the employer can get away with it. They're undocumented, they're insecure, they can't really go to the police or anywhere else to complain about being ill-paid, unpaid, because they are in a dangerous place, not having the documents they need. But that too is not my major concern. Most people pay most of their taxes not in the form of an income tax, but in the form of other kinds of taxes. And their immigrants, whether they're documented or not, pay and pay a lot. Let me give you just a few examples. Sales taxes, that little addition when you buy something in a clothing store or a department store or virtually anywhere. Depending on where you live, sales taxes apply to most, if not all, objects that you buy in a store. The immigrant pays that tax just as well as everybody else. Otherwise, the immigrant doesn't get the article, whether it's a piece of clothing or a piece of equipment or whatever it is. So immigrants are paying loads of money in sales taxes. You might have understood that, but let's continue. Immigrants also pay excise taxes. The federal government puts a very hefty excise tax on things like cigarette products, gasoline, motor oil and gasoline, and alcoholic beverages. Immigrants who smoke or drink or drive anywhere and buy gas are paying excise taxes to Uncle Sam all the time. But here comes the even bigger ones. Everyone who studies immigration knows what the pattern is, because it's been the pattern in the United States for 100 or more years. We have in all American cities, or almost all of them, neighborhoods that we all recognize are in bad shape, are suffering, have poorly maintained housing, poorly maintained streets. You know the pattern. You can call them downtrodden, you can call them slums, it doesn't really matter. They are neighborhoods filled with residential housing, sometimes big apartment buildings, sometimes low, but this is housing where there aren't enough people to live there. They're dilapidated for that reason. The landlords don't maintain those buildings very well, in part because they don't have tenants for the apartments. Either there aren't the folks there to do it, or the folks who might want to live there don't have the money to do it. These neighborhoods deteriorate. And when they deteriorate, the following always happens. Landlords begin to miss their tax payments. They don't pay taxes on these buildings and on the land that these buildings sit on because they're not earning income, because they don't have tenants able and willing to live and pay rent there. Keep that now in your mind. In comes a wave of immigration. Let's say in the last 30 years or so, a wave of immigration mostly from Central and Southern America, our neighbors to the south. The people who come here are overwhelmingly poor. They are running away from political conflict, from war, and from economic distress, poverty. They arrive at an American city with very little more than the clothes on their back and whatever they can carry in a dilapidated suitcase. Where do they go? Well, we all know, and you know too. They go and look for jobs. And the jobs they get are the bottom of the pile. They work in the car wash. They work at the back of the restaurant. They work in the hospital doing the most menial work. They do the work in the fields, picking the crop. You all know, just like I do, just like all Americans do. And here's what else we all know. They crowd together because they don't have much money. And you know where they crowd together? In the poorest, most run-down areas of the city, where the rents are the lowest because the houses have been neglected and the landlords haven't kept them up. You get the picture? But now here comes the economics lesson. It's precisely because the immigrants do that, crowd too many people in so they can pool the little bit of money each of them earns to pay the landlord to have a roof over their head. And it's because immigrants come and fill those dilapidated buildings in that poor part of town that the landlords begin to have the rental income that enables them to pay taxes. That's right. The biggest expense of most immigrants is housing. And a big portion of the money they pay for housing is simply enabling the landlord to whom they pay that money to pay his taxes. A landlord will tell you, the rents I charge are needed by me to cover the cost of the housing that includes the taxes I have to pay. Well, then let's give credit where credit is due. The occupation of sometimes huge portions of cities by immigrants paying rent enables those landlords to pay their taxes. And if the city doesn't get that money from those landlords who get it from those immigrants, then the city can't maintain the public schools, the city can't maintain the roads, the public parks, help at the hospital. You get the picture. We all benefit who live in American cities from the enormous contribution made by large populations of immigrants in maintaining rental income and thereby the tax portion of rental income. The next time you think about expelling immigrants, try to think about this problem. Here's where you might have thought about it in the last 3 years. Over the last few years, the Obama administration deported many such immigrants, millions of them. They therefore lost their apartments. They stopped paying rent because they weren't in the country anymore. Landlords now suffered emptying out buildings. They couldn't collect rents from immigrants that the Obama administration had deported. And so those landlords stopped paying their taxes. Many of them abandoned the buildings, which then deteriorated in ways they would not have otherwise, destroying those neighborhoods, becoming fire hazards, you name it. We all suffered because of the economic consequences of expelling immigrants. If you want to weigh the costs and benefits of immigration, the very least you have to do, if you're honestly engaged in the subject, is weigh the costs, and there are costs, against the benefits, and there are plenty of those. Otherwise, you're not having a conversation, and you're not fairly assessing a situation. What you're doing is making immigrants a scapegoat for other social problems, which is what my opinion is, what we see going on. we have an economy that isn't working well for the majority of American people. And rather than have us as a nation face that fact, talk about an economic system that makes billionaires out of the few, that damages the middle and really hurts the mass of the poor, but instead of talking about a system that works like that, which is what we should be doing, we scapegoat immigrants, as if kicking out another 2 or 3 million is going to make a big difference. Kicking out the last 2 or 3 million wrecked their lives. It did not solve the economic problems of the United States, nor will doing more of it have any better effect. And one of the reasons is all of the economic costs we pay if we don't have these waves of immigration that has sustained the United States for most of its history. We reverse all of that. There is a heavy economic price to pay, whatever the gains, in fewer people using public services. There are losses in having fewer people contribute the sales taxes, the excise taxes, the rental payments that pay the property taxes that landlords have. These are things that have to be faced if you're serious about the issue.